What do you think of when you hear the name Doug Walker?
Hello, I'm the Nostalgia Critic. I remember it so you don't have to.
Do you have nostalgic memories for a critic steeped in nostalgia? Feel uncomfortable regarding the change the channel controversy? Or do you think of internet memes and in-jokes made by Doug or made of Doug? Honestly, for me personally, it's kind of a cocktail of all three. It's hard to really differentiate the memes from the jokes, from the hint of nostalgia, from the pang of honest, actual controversy if you grew up with Doug Walker's Nostalgia Critic, especially if you were some nerdy kid who quite enjoyed talking about movies a little too long and too much. The angry reviewer era of YouTube is thankfully long gone. It was more misses than hits, but when it did hit, it managed to strike something that honestly resonated with a lot of the internet. And while it might be weird going back now and saying, why was any of this ever popular? For a while, it did take up the critical landscape of YouTube. But at a certain point, people kind of stopped and went, hey, isn't it kind of weird that we're all getting this angry over
A bat credit card!
why are we getting so angry about all this? And that kind of led to a recession of sorts of the angry critic. In today's media landscape, the angry critic of yesteryear has been replaced by the overly passionate grifter of today. But this video isn't really about the grifters. As things went on, Doug Walker kind of remained the same. While other critics advanced and changed and evolved, Doug became a constant, like a reminder of an era long since past, and hasn't been doing too terribly considering he's been around for nearly 20 years. Doug Walker's Nostalgia Critic videos tend to average in the modern era decently well, though not nearly as great as he used to be. In 2024, his Nostalgia Critic videos averaged between 50,000 to 250,000 views, with some outliers being his review of Aladdin and Wish. This is opposed to his most popular video on his channel currently, which is his review of Shark Boy and Lava Girl, which ranks in at 5.6 million views, followed closely by his review of It, which is 4.9, Cat in the Hat, 4.6, and The Lorax, 4.3, all of which were around 9 to 8 years ago. In fact, most of his top reviews are from 8 to 9 years ago. This is because Doug re-uploaded most of his videos from Blip TV to his new Channel Awesome YouTube channel about 9 years ago. So even then, most of these reviews are far older than they appear on YouTube. Channel Awesome, formerly ThatGuyWithTheGlasses.com, helped bring several online critics to the forefront of the internet's attention, providing a place where people could post their reviews, safe of YouTube's, at the time, extremely restrictive copyright policies. It became a place where people could become popular. What made Channel Awesome so unique was that it had all the critics and people on the site on the front page, a news section, critics listed, all of them not hidden behind an algorithm, but placed front and center. And granted, yes, Doug Walker's face was on top of everything. You could still access different reviewers and discover new creatives who you wouldn't normally know about. Being accepted to the site was seen as a badge of honor at the time. Granted, knowing how the site functioned and its company politics have really colored our viewpoints of this website, but I digress. Channel Awesome's website is down, which means that Guru Larry has finally lost the stay on Channel Awesome as long as possible challenge. I'm very sorry, Guru Larry, if you happen to be watching. But what happened was, long before Channel Awesome, the website, died down, almost all of the critics on the site left the website. From Lindsay Ellis to Linkara to all the other critics on the website that became very popular. I bet you didn't even know this. Dominic Noble, who has become very successful on YouTube, his earliest videos were on Channel Awesome. So briefly, in fact, that most people don't even recall it happened. But he was there. But they all left following the change to channel controversy. And after leaving Channel Awesome, many critics went on to have a very successful career. Look at Lindsay Ellis. Lindsay Ellis has defined herself in the modern era as one of the chief heads of quote-unquote BreadTube, whatever that means. She's basically become the face of Nebula. She's written books. She's worked with PBS. She's had a career. And others still who used to work on Channel Awesome, such as, say, Mars Girl, have started working in the industries they once criticized. I think, personally, it's a net positive that these critics started in one place, became really successful, and then moved on, in some cases, to bigger and better things. But some did fade away.
It's the biggest betrayal ever, you know, like it ruins everything.
I mean, it could have been worse though, right? I mean, Channel Awesome wasn't normal boots after all.
Oh, don't make me remember that! I wanted to forget those things! Stop this, please! Stop it now!
Undeniably, as a teenager, these critics did shape my perspectives in many ways, as well as my analytical skills. They did push me to engage with media, to examine it, to criticize it. But you go to college, get your master's degree, you make a career out of media criticism, of journalism, of reporting. You come back to the YouTube landscape and you kind of reevaluate the inspiration that pushed you in that direction, don't you? I have been online for a while. In fact, I've actually interacted online with multiple former critics of Channel Awesome, which I should disclose as a kind of a disclaimer before we get started. I owe a lot of respect to that dude with the suede, for example. He gave a lot of advice and feedback to me when I was first starting on YouTube that was incredibly beneficial. In fact, in my first video, if you go back and watch it, that dude with the suede does, in fact, read some of the quotes on there as a favor. And I will repay that favor if he ever asks me to. When I was still working with CBR, Mars Girl offered to do an interview with me, and I was able to, put that into an article, and that was really my first chance at kind of pushing beyond what CBR offered and going into more actual analytical, engaging media. And it was not published on CBR's another site, but the point remains the same. And I know a few former critics of Channel Awesome have seen some of my videos, so there's a non-zero chance they may see me talking shit, and I'm sorry in advance. But what are you going to do? But now I'm kind of at the same age a lot of the critics who were on Channel Awesome were at when they started their career, if not slightly older. So I've had experience. I've been working with criticism for a while. I want to go back now and take a look at the original critics who inspired me when they were roughly my age, when they were first starting out. I want to see how they were when they began, where they went, what progress they made, maybe learn something from their experiences, or perhaps their mistakes, to see if the earliest things I remember, the things that made me fans of them in the first place, still stand the test of time. And I kind of went in thinking one thing, and I kind of left thinking the same thing. I didn't really get my views challenged all that much, because what I saw kind of proved what I suspected. But I did not travel on this alone. I wanted to get more perspective on this than anything else. So recently on stream, I was joined by Cy Scribbles and Crimson Ender, watching a bunch of the earliest reviews of a few select Channel Awesome critics.
So I was following Channel Awesome as a young adult, not a teenager, which might be a little embarrassing. But I only first discovered Doug Walker from his fake beef with the angry video game nerd. And this was before they did the final video that culminated in them fighting in James's basement. So I was there from, like, the super beginning. I was there when it was still called That Guy with the Glasses, I was there for Lindsay Ellis getting hired, Linkara's audition. I followed Spoony before he was even on Channel Awesome, so I was all up in that stuff way back there in the day.
I started watching YouTube basically as soon as it was live. I was kind of like always on. I don't want not to brag, but I was kind of always on the cutting edge of online media, just because of my interests and the direction in my career. I also jumped on to That Guy with Glasses stuff pretty early, along with other critics like the Angry Video Game Nerd. I would say that it was something that I really looked forward to watching when I was younger, and it was a guilty pleasure as I got older, even when I started to kind of see problems with it. I started watching less frequently and being more choosy over what reviews I watched, and then Change the Channel came out, and I was like, you know what? Maybe I'm done.
Now, before we dive too into the topic, I do want to briefly touch upon the Change the Channel controversy and how that document really did alter the entire conversation surrounding Channel Awesome. Undeniably, every critic who was treated poorly by the Walkers, and they deserved much better than they got, and quite frankly, the conditions of the company were appalling. There's no other word to describe it. It is horrendous. They are better videos that can dive into the intricacies of that situation that already exist online, and they are far smarter, far more concise, far more historically interesting videos about that topic. This video is not about Change the Channel. It is about examining the critical and humor styles of these critics when they first started compared to when they were much later on, to see their growth as critics. If you want a history lesson, they are better videos than that for you. But with that out of the way, let's just get into it. Let's just dive right in. Actually, no, let's not dive in, because there's one bit of forbidden knowledge I uncovered while researching for this video that I have to share. There's no place for it anywhere in the video. I just have to express this because I just need to. So Demo Reel, the thing that nobody saw, there is a sketch in Demo Reel where it's heavily implied that Doug Walker's character, at a convention, takes to his bed Aaron Hansen of Game Grumps.
Donnie, hey! Y'all set to hang out today?
Not exactly.
Donnie, this guy. We're talking about anime. They hang out talking about Pokemon? It's crazy, dude. Oh my god. Dude!
Looks like you guys had a lot of fun drinking last night.
I don't drink.
Does this mean that Doug Walker is an unofficial member of the D Club?
We had a club.
Okay.
Called the D Club.
Okay.
Let's talk about Lindsay Ellis first. we really
We love
think you're
and
great.
respect you, Lindsay.
We love you, Lindsay. Please don't hate us.
Chick. I remember it because the dudes don't.
Yeah, Lindsay Ellis is a fantastic critic. Always has been a fantastic critic, and remains a fantastic critic. She's still been publishing quality content onto Nebula. She's flourished after Channel Awesome. She's the only critic here who undeniably hasn't seen a significant drop-off in terms of views, in terms of attention, due to her incredible ability to reinvent herself, without really changing the core appeals of what she offered. Let's be quite blunt. Of all the critics of Channel Awesome, she was the best reviewer by a mile. Her style, her analysis, her perspectives. She was always wrestling with limitations set upon her by the Nostalgia Critic. As a female counterpart to the Nostalgia Critic, she was always trying to do something interesting with that structure, and always ran up against the walls and limitations of that structure.
I like her Pocahontas video. I know she hates it, but I like it.
All right, let's dive in. There's a re-upload with 77 views on it. Let's take a look.
All right, I will be the
Please,
token.
please, Lindsay, we all love you. Don't copyright strike.
Now, first off, Lindsay, please. we really
We
think
love
you're
and
great.
respect you, Lindsay.
We love you, Lindsay. Please don't hate us.
Chick. I remember it because the dudes don't.
We decided to watch a couple of her older videos that we could find. A lot of them are no longer on the internet, I think because Lindsay's embarrassed by them, and quite frankly, I get why, but I also don't get why. I understand you want to separate yourself from this controversy, from this really rough period of time, but even then, she demonstrates great skill as a critic. And yet, she has some of the videos re-uploaded on her channel, but most are kind of hard to find. But we did find a couple. We found especially the Pocahontas video, which is her first review. I think it was the one that she used to get on Channel Awesome. And if you compare that video to her eventual Pocahontas video, which she did make down the road, you can see the skeleton of what would become her much bigger video essay. But at the same time, it's just done in a much shorter, more concise manner. It's very snappy. It does lack a little perspective, insight that she had, context later on, the ability to bring in interviews and video essay techniques that she wouldn't have done at the time because the structures.
She came right out the gate better than most people on the site.
Yeah, by a mile. Really good in general.
And that's really what drew me into her work too, because she was so just clearly more intelligent and informed and had better sense of timing and humor and just everything.
In fact, I do want to point out something really interesting. Both Lindsay and Linkara, who we'll get to later, They are two of the only people in the early days of Channel Awesome who offered dualistic analysis. Now, Watsonian dualistic analysis, which is a reference to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, it's basically the dichotomy between the two ways you can analyze a text. How the story functions within the confines of the story, that's Watsonian, or how the story exists or functions outside the text, that's Doyleist. Let's say a mystery story, right? Why does a piece of evidence show up in a scene? Well, Watsonian explanations would be, well, the killer may have dropped this leaving the scene, or maybe he scuffed his boot on something, and that evidence was there at the right time. Maybe he was frantic and didn't notice he dropped something. Whereas the Doylistic perspective is, we had to give the detective something to find to solve the mystery. It was too difficult otherwise. Here's a clue to lead them along the way, or maybe tease the reader into figuring out what's going on. Maybe they're looking at shoes. Maybe they're rereading the old text to go, oh, hey, did anyone mention scuffed shoes earlier in the book, or what have you? Lindsay Ellis really focused on a lot of the Doylistic perspectives, even back then. Though I would say she's gotten much better at it since developing as a critic. I want to bring this up because Lindsay Ellis is going to be what we measure everyone else in this video by. The progress. Start off with something. You can see the same general techniques in your early video, but they're amped up to a new level later on. She gets better and better and better, and as she sheds the structure of the Nostalgia Critic, she does not shed the qualities that made her interesting to begin with. And that is very interesting because it shows A, that she was confined, and B, that she continued to grow. Anyway, let's watch Linkara's beginning. It's going to be weird watching this. It's always weird seeing them this young, actually.
Happy Halloween, everyone.
Oh my God, he's a child.
With this recap, the only wanted to experiment around with a different format than just the text recaps.
Oh God, I just realized he looks like me in this. I can't even see that.
Do you have a trilby? Do you have a
I don't
trilby,
have a trilby. I have a.
Are you
wait,
sure?
Hang on. I have a fedora though. 1 second.
Oh no, Anthony, don't do it.
Linkara is arguably one of the most noteworthy names on the Channel Awesome website, having been there seemingly since everything began. I mean, I know he wasn't. He had written reviews first, but that was what he was known for a while. Although now I know for a fact he wants to distance himself away from that, and for that I also apologize to Linkara, as with every critic on this video, for dragging him into this conversation. Much like Doug, Linkara is another column of the internet. He's been here since 16, 17 years on. He's been here for a while, and his Atop the Fourth Wall series has not really deviated in terms of focus, in terms of general structure, though it has developed, which we'll get to. We'll get to that. But Linkara has also done other projects, other really interesting projects. I think his Power Rangers retrospectives are some of the best things online. He goes into so much documentary level detail about the Power Rangers throughout the decades, and it is easily some of his best content by a mile. But he's also done analog horror. He did a series called The Winter of '83, which is a fantastic analog horror series. It's a great body of creative work and really demonstrates just how good Linkara is when given the chance to write something. Look, I'm just saying, these two clips were made by the same person.
Escape, no escape.
They chased me until I got here! We need to shut all the doors and windows before they get in!
No one should be in the park right now, and it snowed last night.
Leave your current location. These are definitely human remains.
I am a man!
A lot of people point out to some self-published book he made years ago, but like, have you seen his current stuff? He's gotten a lot better, and I think people don't give him enough credit, and that does bother me. I do think that Linkara, as an online figure, has seen so much criticism because of a lot of reasons, and I feel like it's very unfair to Linkara. I don't know. I feel like he gets less credit than he deserves. But that being said, Linkara is not without criticism, and I'm going to offer my big criticisms that exist from then and exist now, and they're consistent. I don't always like Linkara's lore stuff, but I don't like lore in general with review essays. I do feel like Linkara sometimes, we would thankfully keep the lore to the beginning or the end of the review so you could skip it pretty easily and not worry about it. It wasn't ingrained throughout the whole thing beyond like sight gags or whatever. He had a lot of reoccurring characters in the review that were kind of goofy little parodies that were taken a little too seriously, I think. That's one thing I'm not a big fan of, but I'm also not a big fan of lore in general with this kind of stuff. Like, for example, when Patrick Willems does the same thing, I don't like that either. People love that. I don't care about that stuff. I want to see what their opinions are, their reviews. If I want a story, I'll watch a story. Again, like Winter of 86, which Linkara has proven he can do a good story. I just don't want him in the reviews, that's all. And there are a few comics that Linkara covers that I feel like, I don't really care about this comic. It's not for me. And you know what I do? I do this really crazy thing. I don't watch it if it's not interesting to me. But when he is interesting, I'm there opening day. When a Linkara video comes in, even today, that I think is a good topic, I click on that immediately and just put it on my sidebar and go, okay, I'll watch this in a second, because I don't want to forget that. Because when he hits, he hits. But going back to the early Linkara reviews, one thing is clear, he's definitely developed over time. What I think is interesting, though, is that you can see, even in this first review, the structure of someone who actually understands the medium they're talking about more than Doug does. If that makes sense.
Yeah, well, he's
Way
kept
more
the
thoughtful.
same format like the entire time.
Same
you know?
format, just better at doing it. That's how it comes
Good
down.
on him, yeah. But see, Linkara would upgrade his equipment periodically.
Yeah.
That's the difference, too.
He also knew how to get better lighting, better camera, better microphone.
He
better
learned to
hat.
get better at these things. He actually worked on audio engineering and shit, unlike, Doug and Shane. Didn't want to change at all.
No. Already, though, like, you can see the foundations of what would be a much stronger critical body of work, I feel like.
Yeah, because he was very different from Doug in that he would go over like the history of the thing and kind of curate and present it. He was I think Bennett the Sage kind of followed in his footsteps after a while.
I would say that too. Bennett Sage is more in line with Linkara than Doug.
Bennett started out more as like crass, kind of like internet trolly, but then eventually he started getting more like he would call himself an old curator, like presenting these things to you, you know.
Yeah, still pissed about his original Evangelion review, even though he's blocked it back too. But
I skipped that one because it's just I don't care about Ava, but I'm sure it pissed you off.
Krim, have you heard this Evangelion show before?
I'm gonna be honest with you, Anthony. I avoid the opinions that any straight man has about Evangelion because they're all wrong.
When you go back to Linkara's early content, you see something immediately. You see all the foundational blocks that would become his later style. But there are a few things missing, and it's very clear Linkara recognized his faults in his early reviews and improved upon them. And that's essential because you're going to find a lot of people don't always do that.
Furthermore, the sheer gall necessary to undo the death of Gwen Stacy and the Green Goblin is just so astronomical.
So there's this voice that a lot of men in this era made, I notice. And it's what I like to call, I want to scream, but I'm still living with my mom, so I have to do a fake scream.
Yep.
I have thin walls and I must scream.
Now, Linkara's earliest reviews were of comics that were pretty widely regarded to be disliked. I think his first really good one is Superman at World's End. That's, I think, the first one he did that I'm like, this is a really good review. Before that, he kind of treated his reviews as an extension of his written reviews. So he wrote from the context of, oh, hey, I have a readership. They already know about comics. I don't have to explain everything. I'll just describe what's happening in the page, go panel by panel, yada, yada, yada. He's forgot, hey, a lot of people don't read comics. Even people who like superheroes don't all read comics. And keep in mind, this is before the big MCU boom. This is 16, 17 years ago. So a lot of people didn't know about who the Jackal was. They didn't know about the Clone Saga. They didn't know who Frank Miller really was outside the guy who made Sin City, if even that. They probably didn't even know who Alan Moore was. So a lot of people didn't know about comics.
I think that there is an art of making a review / reaction to a piece of media that you can still kind of follow even if you haven't seen it. You'd had to have read this comic and like be up to date on this comic to really like be able to talk about the review or really like know what he's getting at or talking about.
I think this was also primarily for his audience that followed his blog, so he's kind of just assuming they know his earlier coverage on this plot line on his blog. So yeah, I mean, obviously this is his first video. He's gonna have some fuck ups.
Also, I want to point out that starting off your review career by going in the middle of the Clone Saga is a choice. The Clone Saga is one of the most infamously convoluted plot lines in comic book history. Like, because the writers didn't know what they were doing. So they just made shit up as they went along.
Well, the only reason I know that is because of him, though, actually. And actually, it's thanks to Linkara that when Ben Reilly showed up in Across the Spider-Verse, I lost my shit laughing.
Yeah, it's great. I love it.
So thanks, Linkara. Thanks for that. My friend had no idea why I was cackling my ass off.
He was positioned now as a comic authority to a lot of people who were coming to thatguywiththeglasses.com for movie reviews. Not comic book fans, film fans. Linkara took advantage of this new position by educating his audience on comics. Not just simply what happened in the lore of the comics, but also behind the scenes. And that's, I think, where Linkara shone the most. He became a place where people went to understand superhero comics, to understand the writers, the artists, the drama behind the scenes, why certain things happened the way they did, because comics are not reader-friendly. You pick up issue 1 of Captain Marvel, for example, and you don't know if it's the first issue 1 or the 19th issue 1, because Marvel relaunches the comics so often. Even Spider-Man, who's a pretty mainstream superhero, it's very intimidating on where to start with him. You start with Amazing Fantasy 15, you start somewhere in the middle, and that's even getting to the X-Men, which have like 15 titles on a regular basis at the same time. And Linkara wasn't even a Marvel guy, he was a DC guy mostly. So all of that kind of added up. How do you start with comics? Well, he would give you explanations, he would give you these prologues at the beginning of his reviews that got bigger and bigger and bigger as time went on. I think as he realized the value of his audience understanding the context for each video. But go back to his early reviews, he just dives into the comic. He just jumps right in. He doesn't give any context, he just jumps right in. And it's clear that maybe his audience complained, or maybe he questioned the value of it himself, or maybe a combination of the two. Whatever it is, his reviews became just as much the context surrounding stories as the story itself. And that proved instrumental in converting a lot of young fans into comic books. And again, comic book fandom is kind of gatekeepy. They kind of push people away. Linkara brought people in. And as a result, he became a great counterbalance to what would ultimately become a lot of negativity in the comic book space online over the next several years. Again, that's not to say Linkara is without fault. No critic is. But what he offered the internet was far greater than I think he even realized at the time. He wasn't just writing silly reviews or doing a few silly gags, even though he did do that. What he also did was introduce a lot of comic book fans to lore that helped equip them to understand comics. I mentioned before, there were a bunch of videos he did that I just have no interest in. But even when I clicked on a video that I had no interest in initially, he made it compelling. Great example of that is the ROM video, which is this obscure Marvel character that's like part of a product deal they did. I had no idea who this character was. Never read anything about him. But the Linkara retrospect really offered a lot of perspective for me as a fan that I could know. I learned stuff. And it was just as good as his Cassandra Cain retrospect, or this Titan retrospect, both of which I personally did like, and I personally knew a little bit going in. And even then I still learned something. And I was a fan at the time. I was a fan going into Linkara of comic books. That's the value of offering context and offering information to an audience. And I think it's incredible.
And now for something completely different.
Oh, finally, a film of truly graphic, pretentious, and amazing sensationalism that I can fully get behind it.
Of all the members of Channel Awesome, Brad Jones is kind of unique because he's the only one who stuck with Doug Walker after Change the Channel. That's something I can discuss for hours on its own. I'll be honest with you. There's a lot of complicated feelings about that too. The guy started as a very small critic before being discovered by Spoony, of all people, Noah Antwaller. We'll get to him later as well.
Like, with Cinema Snob, I didn't watch much of his main stuff. I actually liked his vlogs he would do in the parking lot of movie theaters, like right after he saw a movie, and sometimes he'd have some of his friends with him, and they just talk about the movie they just watched, and they were great.
With Brad Jones's style, it's a very simple shtick, but I think it's a very effective shtick. He played a character who was a snobby film critic who was reviewing sleazy, bad movies. I think a lot of the character draws from the Roger Ebert reviews or those higher-end kind of film critics who kind of decided, or like the tastemakers of the film industry, who would shoo at horror films that were sleazy and trashy.
Jason, you can't hear him, you can't see him, he hardly even breathes. He's the latest word in leading men from the geniuses at Paramount Pictures. You get the idea. Friday the 13th, the final chapter, is 90 minutes of teenagers being strangled, stabbed, impaled, chopped up, and mutilated. That's all this movie is. It's just mindless, bloody violence. And just think of the message this film offers to its teenage audience. The world is a totally evil place, this movie says. It'll kill you. It doesn't matter what your dreams and hopes and ambitions are. It doesn't matter if you have a new boyfriend or a new girlfriend or you've got plans for the future. You can forget those plans because you're going to wind up dead. There is literally nothing else in this movie. And the sickest thing is, this isn't the final chapter. That's just an advertising gimmick. The ending clearly sets up a sequel. And what I want to know is, I wonder if they're going to be heartless and cynical enough to make the sequel, because why not? They've already taken the bucket to the cesspool 4 times for this sludge. I think the people who made this movie ought to be ashamed of themselves, and that's what I think, Gene. Yeah. And I'm going to vote no.
And I'm not just talking Halloween. I think Roger Ebert liked Halloween, but there was a whole thing where, and people don't really know this, Gene Siskel on Siskel and Ebert actually doxed the creators of the movie Silent Night, Deadly Night on television back in the 80s because he didn't like the movie. He thought it was distasteful.
And Silent Night, Deadly Night now has the distinction of joining I Spit on Your Grave as one of the 2 most contemptible films I have seen. And I don't mean to think it's campy. It really is quite awful. And Ira Richard Barmack produced it. You people have nothing to be proud of, even if you made a few bucks off of all the negative publicity. Your profits truly are blood money.
And so I think Brad Jones was channeling that. He was a parody of film criticism, but also a film critic at the same time. And a lot of his reviews were of these really obscure, really shitty movies. Now, what's interesting is this. Film critics tend to hit one of 2 modes at this time. They went for the real big mainstream dumpster fires, or they went for so obscure that no one had heard about it at the time. You had to dig through the video store toss-out bin to find these videos in the first place, in the clamshell tapes. Brad Jones was the dumpster diver of that industry in the best possible way. He would jump in and look at these really obscure, really cruddy, really poorly made movies from the 80s, 70s, and so forth, and review them. Offered a lot of context for how the movie got made. He looked at who made it, all that kind of stuff. And his reviews were very short. They're very bite-sized at first, but got bigger and bigger as time went on.
Sallow is the anti-happiness, the anti-joy.
He was way more over the top at first.
Right?
Sadism with lovely
He actually went less over the top over time.
That thing was, what's with Brad? He actually toned it back.
Yeah, because he's really playing like a more cartoonish caricature of a snob here.
I do think what's interesting is that whereas other reviewers maybe honed in more on what worked about their stuff, Brad Jones pulled back.
Sallow is just the kind of beauty in filmmaking that I've been missing all of these months.
Naturally, the movie has to start with a band. Not the band, but a band.
He also added a lot of lore, which I'm going to ignore because I don't care about that. But that also helped develop his character, but also draw back the extremes of his character. He became less of the snob and more of just Brad Jones as time went on. A little exaggerated, yes, but he didn't maintain the same character in terms of writing style, in terms of structure. I do think he's still playing a character, but it's not as extreme as it was in those early reviews. He's not hovering over the toilet, vomiting because he saw salad. Is it a good or bad thing? I don't really know. But he did offer a lot of information for audiences at the time. For example, the naming conventions of films. A lot of people know this. The movie Zombie, which is in Italy known as Zombie 2, is an unofficial sequel to Dawn of the Dead. When Zombie 2 was released in America, it was released as Zombie. The sequel to Zombie 2 in Italy is called Zombie 3. When that film was released in America, it was called Zombie 3. There's no Zombie 2 in America. And it's kind of confusing to a lot of people because they go, well, where's Zombie 2? Did I miss this movie? Brad Jones said, hey, listen, there is Zombie 2. Here's what it is. Here's Zombie 3. Here's what that is. But there's also Zombie 4, Zombie 5, Zombie 6, all the way up to Zombie 7 based on the naming conventions of certain films.
And here I am now reviewing a movie called Zombie 7. Except you know what? There is no part of me that actually believes that this movie was ever called Zombie 7. The only evidence of this is an alternate title listing on IMDb, a fact about this movie that was not present over a year ago when I reviewed Zombie 6. Not that the title Zombie 90 is any better, but at least it's official.
It's wild, and actually I think is more interesting than any of the individual films in its series, other than Zombie, which I think is a great little horror film from Italy. He was also one of the first people I know online who have did a lot of the religious films, treating them like exploitation trash, just like a horror film, kind of going into how these trashy exploitation Christian films do all the same things these exploitation horror films do, only without the irony and self-awareness. I genuinely think his review of Rocket Your Decision is actually a really good review. Even going back to it now.
Some of these groups, some are even involved in the occult.
Name one. Go ahead. You brought it up. Name one example. I'm not saying there aren't any, but if you're going to paint an entire genre of music as a cultist, back it up with at least one example.
You know, at this point, this is getting kind of sad. We are looking at a movie about how this kid's elders are taking something as innocent as his taste in music and using it to destroy his personality and his life.
And what about the lifestyles of the popular groups and artists? Some are admitted homosexuals.
Kid, go fuck yourself. Your decision is to not listen to rock music. Fine. My decision is that I don't have to listen to any more of what you have to say, because as soon as you bring your homophobic beliefs into this one-sided conversation, I am done with you.
And now for something completely different.
These really weird cryptic subtitles that appear all over these Japanese games, and I can't imagine they make much more sense in Japanese than they do in English. But I always like the air quotes, and I'll be waiting here. I have no idea what that's supposed to mean. But if there's one thing Square does well, it's making really awesome trailers that overhype the shit out of the game for fanboys
Yeah,
who
it's
will buy
fair.
anything Square puts out and consider it a masterpiece.
That hasn't
And then
changed.
Have you considered
Got
it
air
looks
gaze and-
fucking cool? Who
Yeah.
cares?
Oh God, Spoony. Okay, I'm not gonna lie. This is the one that actually bothered me the most. This is the hardest to come back to. Of all the critics on Channel Awesome's early days, again, I'm only covering a few. This is the last one of the review. If you want me to do another one, I will. But for right now, I'm gonna stop with Spoony and go right to Doug after this. But of all the tertiary reviewers on Channel Awesome, Spoony was the one that imploded the most spectacularly, and it's also kind of depressing to see. There's a Down the Rabbit Hole video that really goes into detail about all the specifics of Spoony's career, and I think it's really good to watch that. A real fantastic video. People don't really know this. Spoony actually was in some ways more popular than Doug. He kind of started separate from Doug, and then they kind of combined forces, so to speak. But the Spoony Experiment was honestly, for its time, one of the most popular commentary channels on YouTube for a very long time.
He was the first one to kind of do this sort of half let's play, half review type thing. I don't think a lot of other people were doing this.
His review of Final Fantasy VIII changed the conversation about Final Fantasy VIII. To this day, we're still feeling repercussions of that discussion, I feel, because it did change popular opinion so much. Because Final Fantasy VIII was seen as popular for a while, up until Spoony kind of recontextualized how people saw it. And now we're seeing a shift back from that, but there was like a 5-year period where people just quote Spoony verbatim.
Okay.
So he's just calling things gay because it's 2008.
I mean, it is, but like that's I'm enjoying it. Spoony, your brain is
just
tiny.
wanted to be goofy, is the.
You know what? There are two kinds of Final Fantasy fans. Either you're LGBT or you're lying. I can't say for other people, but I know that my being like, haha, that's so gay, but like in a reclaiming way definitely comes from this kind of millennial humor of like, I'm going to make everything gay and there's nothing you can do to stop me.
I think it might have been you that said that, Krim, where like the jokes back then were haha, you're gay, and now the jokes are haha, I'm gay.
Yeah, basically.
So I'm gonna. It's like, being gay isn't your choice. It's mine. You're gay now.
Taste the rainbow, motherfucker!
See, the thing with Spoony is, in many ways, he was a precursor to the angry reviewer we see today, but not the same kind of angry. He would be upset that the past is changing, upset that things are ruined by Hollywood. Though, unlike, say, grifters or anyone like that, like today's, which I'm not comparing Spoony to at all, I'm just saying there is that similarity. Spoony came from a place of authentic disappointment.
I gotta show you this bit. It's skipping ahead a little bit, but fuck it. I'm gonna show you the absolute worst line in the entire game. You are not gonna believe this shit.
How are you today? I thought that I knew all of the paladins around here. What's a paladin? What's a paladin?
What's a paladin?
What's a paladin?
It's offensive. It's offensive to every loyal fan who ever paid money for an Ultima game. It's a middle finger right up the ass to anyone who ever gave a shit, who ever got emotionally invested in the story or the characters. Why? Well, not only has the Avatar been around Paladins since before he was the fucking Avatar, one of his closest friends and oldest, most stalwart companions through every adventure, Sir Dupre, he was a paladin who literally sacrificed his life by jumping into a cremation oven alive in the Avatar's place to save the entire world and the cosmos as we know it. It was one of the most moving, shocking character deaths in gaming history. And how, oh how, does the Avatar remember his noble sacrifice?
What's a paladin?
And his critical style really analyzed how bad works weren't simply bad because they were just not good, but especially in franchises he'd grown up with, the bad works functioned as a betrayal, a true betrayal of the investment he had put into them. I think when I think of Spoony, the one clip I think of more than anything else, not a lot of people think Final Fantasy VIII, they think of the Highlander stuff, but I think of this scene from the end of his massive Ultima retrospective, where he just breaks down why the degradation of the series hurts him so badly on a spiritual level. And I'm going to let this just play out because I think it's one of the greatest, just unfiltered, genuine, earnest feelings I've ever seen from any of these guys.
And my dad would work from home, which again was this new thing. You know, you didn't have to use a typewriter. So, but when he was at work, my older brother and I would play on it. And we only had one game. It's probably the first computer game I ever played. And it was Ultima 3. I didn't play the earlier ones until a lot later, but yeah, we played Ultima 3. And my brother would play it with me. He taught me how to play, and I was so young, I didn't know what the I was doing. Like, I didn't know the story, and even if he told me, I wouldn't have understood. But he'd explain what's going on. He didn't get mad if I got his characters killed, and I did that a lot. And he put a lot of time. We all put a lot of time into this, but I was 3 or 4. It's gonna happen. I don't know if you believe. It's basically how I learned to read. All sorts of stuff. It kind of helped shape my interest today. It got me interested in sci-fi, fantasy. I wanted to read more about characters like this. What was going on? Got me interested in D&D. I was reading Tolkien when other kids were struggling with the Hardy Boys. I was reading D&D books at recess when other kids were playing around with Foursquare, and that got me in a lot of trouble.
It's actually heartbreaking to watch. It really is hard to see that because you see the authentic pain. Like, it's not an act. He's not doing it for attention. This is like him just breaking character and going earnestly, this is why this bothers him. And from that context, it recontextualizes everything up until that point. Spoony wasn't just a character, he was authentic. And I think that actually is what makes everything so much sadder with how things turned out with him. Because clearly, again, the Down the Rabbit Hole video goes way more in detail. He just couldn't keep that pace going. His own mental illness issues and concerns, they kind of broke him down after a while. But one thing also, you look at his humor style. Like, yeah, a lot of it is very crass. A lot of it is very offensive. And it is mid-2000s humor, so there's a lot of humor that, let's just say, hasn't aged all that well. But what made Spoony's humor age better than even his contemporaries is, at the end of the day, Spoony always made himself the butt end of the joke. He always brought it back around to himself. And because of that, even if he insulted you to your face online, you knew he was going to come back to himself eventually. And so any treatment you got, he was going to get twice as hard. And that was, I think, one of the things that made his comedy even from a modern standpoint, age better, even when it was incredibly offensive. Because nothing he said about anyone else would be as bad as what he said about himself, unless it was towards the capitalist companies and the organizations that were ruining his childhood. I really wish Spoony had figured out a way to get through his problems, because there was a lot there. And again, he had a lot of opportunities to do so, but it's just a really sad cautionary tale at this point. But he's one I wish could pull through. But the thing also is, I'm not sure Spoony would really last all that well in the internet landscape today. I think Cy put it best on the stream when discussing Spoony, though. So I'll just let that play out.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to imagine like a timeline where he kept at it and maybe evolved his content, but I'm not sure he would be able to keep up with internet trends.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Unfortunately,
he was kind of an old school kind of guy. A lot of his interests were from the 80s and 90s as well. But that did eventually come back into popularity. Like all the Zoomers love 90s shit now.
Okay, Doug, this is the part you all came to, right? This is what you wanted to see, the Doug Walker segment. Well, look at the runtime. We got a lot to cover here. We're going to be talking a lot about Doug Walker. If you clicked on Channel Awesome during that period of time, you clicked on it because of Doug Walker, because of the Nostalgia Critic character. There are multiple video essays about Doug Walker, and I do want to flash a few on screen right now, because I did reference these when writing this segment. I referenced them when trying to come up with ideas, and they deserve credit because they're fantastic videos. But I think that from a perspective of comparing him to his peers, something very interesting comes to light, and I want to bring it up right now. Unlike, say, Normal Boots,
I wanted to forget those things! I don't want those terrible memories anymore! Stop this, please!
which was a coalition of different popular YouTubers at the time, Channel Awesome exists solely because of Doug Walker. Doug Walker erected that. He wasn't the guy running the company, but he was the face of the company. People came for Doug. And it's kind of stunning to think about that now in a post-The Wall world. You know The Wall, of course, right? The classic Pink Floyd movie. And you've definitely heard of Doug Walker's review of The Wall, where it's incredibly unfunny, the jokes are cringe, and he seems to demonstrate no knowledge of what The Wall actually is. Even when the lyrics of the songs explain the point to his face, he misses the point somehow. And it's baffling. Many people have called him incurious. Many people have called him not a very insightful person. Some people call him unchanging, shackled to the character of the critic when he clearly wants to move on, but is limited by either skill, resources, or his popularity. When going back to Doug's earliest videos, a new question comes to light. Was Doug Walker ever funny to begin with? I think when discussing Doug, you need to break it down. How was Doug Walker as a media critic? How was he as a comedian? And how did he grow and develop over time? Because he did grow and develop. He did change. The problem is he didn't change for the better, unlike everyone else who refined their style. He's not a Lindsay. He's not a Linkara. He's not even a Brad Jones.
I was watching one of Malcolm Ray's behind the scenes, and he was recording Tamara doing a voiceover, and he was doing it with the camcorder mic. And I was like, why? Even after buying an entire studio, he still uses the onboard camcorder audio.
Oh, God. Even I don't do that. Like, I've not been doing it for that long. He's using the camcorder mic?
Yeah, him and James Rolfe are both the same. They kind of are stuck in the old ways they did things and just won't learn anything new. It drives me crazy.
That's ridiculous. With Doug Walker, humor is the first thing anyone thinks of. So, were his jokes funny? Well,
Optimus Prime is in this movie. Of course he goes, wow.
It's almost charming in a way, though.
It kind of is in a weird way.
He's huge. He's like gigantic. And the good guys are the Autobots, and they kick ass. And one of them's a Hummer.
Basically, this is what bum reviews became.
Basically, yeah.
Where he would just, he just pretends to be a crazy homeless man reviewing movies, which might be a little problematic.
You know, I used to think that was an act. I'm not sure anymore after this. I'm not sure it's an act. How much caffeine did he have before making this?
This is just what, Loud was funny back then. Loud was funny back then.
Caffeine, I think he might have just fucking taken a nosedive into a pile of cocaine.
There's a reason why Doug Walker's early jokes worked in these videos. But as time went on, the jokes got less and less funnier because they got more and more complicated. The more components he added to his humor, the less funny it got, because in order to get the joke, you'd have to be in on the joke. And I think that really undermined a lot of his humor early on. It got worse as time went on, and his weaknesses were already apparent, but that key element that you had to be in on the joke to begin with really undermined what was already a weak premise of his humor. Doug famously stated at one point that he believes that humor is derived from someone suffering. That in order to make a good joke, someone has to be the butt of the joke, and that butt of the joke has to be hurt in some way.
As mentioned by myself and others, all comedy is based on some form of misery. So you always have to address something unpleasant in order to get a laugh. George Carlin, one of the world's most beloved rule breakers, once said, "Comedy doesn't work unless someone's getting offended." And he's right. Puns are a mockery of language, goofy faces are a mockery of strange-looking people. You really have to think about it, but yeah, somebody's pride has to be challenged in order for it to work. But what most good comedians realize is the more truth in pain you can emphasize, usually the more funny it is. Tom and Jerry is much funnier than Smurfs because it really looks like the pain hurts. Malcolm in the Middle is much funnier than Full House because they address much harsher realities. But of course, if you were to see any of these in real life, you'd probably be horrified and wouldn't laugh at all. Hence, this is why comedy is a defense mechanism, which I go more into in other editorials.
Through this context, let's analyze the bat credit card gag, one of Doug's famous jokes.
$1 million. $2 million.
Oh, here it comes, guys.
$3 million. $4 million. $7 million.
Here it comes.
Never leave the cave without it.
A bat credit card?
Here we go.
They gave him a bat credit card? They had the balls to give one of the greatest superheroes of all time a bat credit card?
Here it comes.
No! No! Does not compute! Does not compute!
I will say this is probably the funniest, this is probably the peak of his career.
Yeah, this is the funniest thing he ever did.
Doug today would have had that joke go on for like 10 minutes, and Malcolm would have cameoed as some kind of character.
And then the shot would have lingered a little too long. Like, some of his editing choices are really strange now.
Like,
too.
it just coming back to him all downtrodden, and then he just immediately starts screaming and ranting again. That's good timing.
Yeah, and it's so weird comparing his editing now to then, because like now a shot will linger.
For whatever reason, he thinks it's the funniest shit to just make jokes go on too long. It's just, oh god, why, dude?
This gag from this lens works because Doug, as a fan of Batman, is psychically suffering from Batman and Robin. That this one moment has broken him, and the humor is derived not from the film itself, but from his pain in response to the film. Now, you can derive that in one of two ways. Either A, you're sympathizing with Doug. You're also a fan who is in duress, who is in pain, and thus you accept his pain as your own. Or you're laughing at these nerds for getting so upset over a bat credit card, which is such an unimportant detail. And both ways, the joke works. Either you're laughing at the fans, or you're laughing because you're a fan and also in pain. But I don't think that's why the joke works. I think the joke works for a very different reason. Because it's dumb, and because it's easily repeatable. Doug Walker's humor does not work because it's about someone suffering, or it's a reference to a movie. Doug Walker's best jokes work because they're easily repeated, and his entire style is about repetition. That is the big issue. It's not that Doug Walker is trapped, it's that his humor is all about repeating the same thing again and again and again and again. You watch that Batman and Robin video, he does the same 5 or 6 gags throughout the whole video, and they start off funny, but he keeps doing it.
And seeing how this is one of the worst films of all time, special precautions have been made today to prevent me from myself. But they didn't count on my cyanide pills. So, let's take a look and see just how bad Batman and Robin really is.
Chicks dig the car.
This is why Superman works alone.
I can't do it! No! No! Does not compute! Does not compute! Does not compute! I think so! As they plan to stop the evil Mr. Freeze from, you guessed it, taking over the world.
Of course!
By using her love of deadly plants, Poison Ivy's diabolical goal is to, you guessed it, take over the world.
Of course!
The only thing that would make this scene lamer is if Robin actually shouted Cowabunga.
Cowabunga!
Seriously, this place is so cliched, all you need is a strike of lightning on the building. Sheesh, all that's missing is for Freeze to shout out first Gotham, then the world.
First Gotham, and then the world!
I think the only thing missing here is for Poison Ivy to shout out curses. Go ahead! Say it! Say it! Say it!
Curses!
God damn this movie! A bat credit card. They gave him a bat credit card? A bat credit card? A bat credit card?
What exactly is so ridiculous and anger-inducing about a bat credit card?
And when he doesn't repeat the joke too often, he just drags it out for way, way, way too long.
What are they gonna talk about?
Marijuana.
Oh, my favorite topic.
See, that's a funny joke.
Marijuana.
Did Simon the Chipmunks just say marijuana? What possessed Simon?
See, this is his problem. He always just drives jokes into the ground.
Yeah.
It can't.
I thought it was funny. You're going on too long.
Yeah, that's the problem.
He did that even back then. Oh my god, he always drags out jokes way too long, and he thinks that's funny, but it's not. It's painful.
Yeah, it was a good joke. I snickered, and then he keeps going. We get it.
Yeah, like, dude, you had a
pleased with
punchline.
himself.
Yeah,
I remember.
So pleased with himself.
You know what? I remember distinctly because I actually joined their pay thing to get like behind the scenes stuff back in the day.
Nerd.
And I would listen to the commentaries by him and Rob, and they were doing one on Dungeons and Dragons. And Doug was doing that stupid voice the entire thing, and his brother was desperately trying to tell him to stop in the most polite way possible, and he would not take the fucking hint.
Yeah,
you know, the Jeremy Irons, show me your evil voice, you know that? He wouldn't stop, and Rob is like desperately trying to drop massive hints on his head that it's not fucking funny.
You know what? That actually makes a lot of sense.
Memory just unlocked. Just listening to that commentary was like secondhand embarrassment.
Two things happen. One, you repeat a joke too many times, it stops being funny. You heard it before. It's already old hat. The jokes go on for so long, but that adds to the ingrainment in your head, the mimetic quality of it. Doug Walker is successful because of memes, not simply because the memes you see online, but the idea behind a meme, that if you repeat something enough times, it becomes part of the common language, the visual language, the accepted language of the mind. Doug Walker's comedy works because he did it so often, and he didn't stop doing it. How many times did Casper the Friendly Ghost show up randomly, saying, "Timing!" You know, that kind of joke isn't really funny on its own, out of context. It's just a reference to a joke that was funny. But because it was done so often and so repetitively, the joke became a meta joke. It became a meme. And that was where he derived his humor from. And that memory of a funny joke is what made fans at the time think the review was funny. In my opinion, anyway. But that's where the problem comes in, doesn't it? These simple jokes are best when they're simple. You know, they're easy to repeat. Context is easy to establish. The more you layer on meaning, the harder it is to be funny. The more ideas you present, the more difficult it is to communicate something clearly. This is one reason why I think Doug's best reviews were the commercial videos. Each commercial is short, simple, communicates a very simple idea, relies itself on mimetic imagery, and it does so to sell a product.
I mean, I might believe that wasn't intentional if they don't drop any more innuendos.
The Wonder Boner. My wife would like that.
You know!
Doug didn't have to say a lot. He just had to respond to what was happening on screen and go, well, isn't that strange that's happening? The jokes weren't complicated. They came very easily, and thus they played very well into Doug's natural humor.
I remember, I think it was in the King and I, where he had like a history book about the real king and was talking about, is the movie going to respect that? And then he cut to something that was clearly, blatantly, historically inaccurate. And he was just smiling, tosses the book aside, shoots off screen, a bunch of pages come fluttering down. It's like, that's a good joke. That's a good joke right there. If he would just do more like quick things like that instead of dragging out the jokes, he could be much funnier.
When Doug went to more complicated gags, more bigger scale parody sequences, even before demo reveal, his quote-unquote final review, the one of Scooby-Doo they did before To Boldly Flee, it ends with an extended gag referencing Star Trek The Next Generation's ending, its last episode's ending.
I should have done this a long time ago.
You were always welcome.
God, I should have done this a long time ago.
You were always welcome.
If you've never seen Star Trek, this scene means nothing to you. You know, it does. What does this communicate to you if you've never seen Star Trek? But if you have seen Star Trek, you know what it references. But even then, it's not funny. It's not a funny scene. It's just kind of a reference. There's no joke here beyond, oh, hey, Star Trek did this, which isn't inherently very funny. There's a scene later on, I think with the Titanic reviews, where Doug Walker is just dressed as Darth Vader and he repeats the no scene from Revenge of the Sith. That's not funny. It's just a reference.
Yes.
The mimetic humor that Doug incorporates works internally because his jokes are particularly simple. When he's using mimetic imagery in reference to things his audience may or may not recognize, however, it becomes far harder to communicate a joke because, quite frankly, it doesn't land if you don't get the reference.
If you have to explain a joke, there is no joke!
Or if you don't find that thing funny. If just repeating things as funny, that's not enough. This is why a lot of parody films struggled for a very long time. Because they relied purely on, oh, hey, I recognize this. Even ignoring Disaster Movie, which is undeniably one of the worst parody films ever made, the movies would just reference other movies. And that wasn't really funny all that much. Take Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein. They are funny, but that's because they work as films. The humor is not derived necessarily from, oh, hey, that's the prop from the original Frankenstein, which it was, by the way. Gene Wilder and Mel Brooks did bring actual set pieces from the original 1930s Frankenstein into Young Frankenstein. This is something you will never pick up on. You just might think, oh, that looks like a mad scientist laboratory. That's not relevant to the joke. It doesn't draw attention to itself because the scene works as a scene when they're in that laboratory. They are visual references to Frankenstein, but only in the biggest, most broadest ways. They are scenes that are copied, like, say, the blind man in the cabin who Frankenstein comes to visit. But the scene works not because, oh, hey, it's the blind man from Frankenstein. It's because the scene is authentically a funny gag where a blind guy keeps hurting the monster. And that works for that reason. Same with Blazing Saddles. Yeah, it is a satire of the Western, but it's not funny because it's a Western. It's funny because it's a good story that takes place in a historical period of time. And it's visually very funny. There's a lot of good gags, a lot of good humor. And you get the humor even if you've never seen a Western before. You don't get Doug Walker's To Boldly Flee jokes unless you've seen 50 other movies and 100 reviews. They just don't stand on their own, which is why the humor does not translate well, especially removed from the original review. It doesn't communicate anything to anyone anymore. Mimetic humor only works if you're familiar with the meme. The moment the meme dies away, you just look at the image and go, what is this? Like, try showing a TikTok kid the has cheeseburger cat. Like, yeah, it's a cute cat, but it doesn't mean anything to them because it's divorced from any meaning that you could possibly have. It's a dead meme. And Doug Walker's entire comedy style is dependent on memes that will one day die. And the further you get from that meme, the less funny it gets, which is why all of his humor was emblazoned with a big old expiration date after demo reel. Because all of his humor after that point, well, not all, but I'd say 70% of his jokes became dated. The moment they were released, they were dated. And that would be even if the jokes were good, which they just weren't. All the jokes were just references to other pieces of media.
The first episode of Demo Reel begins with something that had never been done before in comedy. A parody of The Sixth Sense. A girl portraying a young Haley Joel Osment is in bed and tells Doug Walker that she sees dead people. And then in a stroke of comedic genius, Doug Walker shows up again to play Beetlejuice in the scene, because the height of comedy is when things from one franchise appear in another franchise. But like with all good jokes, one isn't enough, so you have to remember the Doug Walker comedy rule of 5. Other ghosts appear, like a poorly aged ghost dad appearance, Casper, meaning that this new series is already starting out with a callback to the Nostalgia Critic, and finally culminating in the Ghostbusters lightning bolt exploding into the room to take down the ghosts. The Ghostbusters shoot all the ghosts, and then Doug Walker, because Doug Walker's character is supposed to be Bruce Willis, despite no attempts to make Doug Walker look like Bruce Willis, and then credits roll to the sound of Doug Walker doing a Randy Newman impersonation. And you can tell that this is a Randy Newman impression because Doug makes sure to sing the line, "This is your good old friend Randy saying boo," like Randy Newman is obviously known to do.
They weren't funny gags, which is depressing to say, because I laughed at a lot of Doug Walker's old jokes. Because, oh hey, I recognize that thing, it's funny. A lot of Doug Walker's humor also now derives on, well, that just happened. But because Doug repeats the joke so often and doesn't know when to cut it off, it just goes on and on and on, and it's no longer the snappiness of the, well, that just happened style of humor that sometimes works with the MCU. It's just, oh, well, that just happened, and I'm going to layer it with more. Doug Walker doesn't follow a rule of 3. He follows a rule of 17. I know Lady Emily in her video was like, oh, well, Doug Walker follows a rule of 5. You are being too kind. He keeps going and going and going and going and going until the world implodes around him. But let's stop talking about Doug Walker's humor. We've established it's not very funny, and it does, over time, degrade in quality. For the most part, he will occasionally have a good joke, but let's step away from humor. Doug Walker is the Nostalgia Critic, right? How is he as a critic? Well, going back to his early reviews, it's very clear that Doug Walker is trying to do, he's just riffing on movies, and that's what he's best at. He's best when he's just commenting on a film and going, oh, well, that's kind of goofy.
This is Rose. I mean Elizabeth. She's excited to be on Titanic except for one tiny little detail. She has to marry a man that she doesn't love. Yeah! Sound fucking familiar?
Why did this happen? It doesn't make any sense. Very lighthearted, very easy to follow, not too in-depth. As established with Lindsay Ellis is a critic. She's diving into the context, why the film was made a certain way, what messages it communicates, the themes, the ideas. Doug Walker rarely does that. He mainly focuses on the Watsonian perspective, how the story functions internally, and as such, he kind of stops at a certain point. But there are a few exceptions. I want to highlight them right now. I'd say Doug Walker's best review to this day, when it was, again, he did a lot of movies that are just bad, like really badly made, like The Room, for example, which is an iconic review. But I think his best review is that of Patch Adams. I think when he reviewed Patch Adams, he kind of started to touch upon really analyzing media from a more critical standpoint.
He still has a brain. Maybe he wants to participate too. Maybe Beanie knows a lot more than we give him credit for.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe we should treat him like a person instead of just some useless punchline.
Beanie, how much taller is Will Chamberlain than you?
Our healer, everybody! When he's not done making fun of what's wrong with you, he goes down to the orphanage to mock the kids with no parents. Oh, wait, that's right. Adams is the hero because the big bad establishment doesn't want people laughing. This is most unorthodox.
I think his discussion of the real Patch Adams versus the fake Patch Adams, the fictional version by Robin Williams, it really communicates an idea of, hey, this actually upset him quite deeply. This is actually disturbing. This is not right. This is ethically not correct.
I've looked him up. His work is fascinating, and it goes beyond simply jumping around like a jackass. He's a professional. He takes his patients seriously. He works with each one individually. Every experience is different, and he works hard. And wouldn't you know it, he didn't like this movie very much. He said it portrayed him as just a clown instead of a hard-working doctor who did practice medicine with a license, did not steal from a hospital, and had a male best friend who sadly lost his life and was not just a cheap romantic foil.
When you've had a fairly simple film made of your life by a person a foot shorter than you, people still feel they have a sense that they know you.
And that's where he kind of touched on something more interesting. With the Haunting video, where he goes into The Haunting, he analyzes why The Haunting, the remake of The Haunting, doesn't function, because it tries to accomplish something different than the original film.
It's one of the worst remakes of all time, if not the worst. I mean, when you get down to it, what's The Haunting about?
It's about family.
No, it's not! No, it's not. It's about being scared. And I hate to break it to you folks, but redemption isn't scary. The original is scary. There's no cartoon ghosts, dumbass subplots, or Disney-style good versus evil scenarios. It's just a ghost story, and a brilliant one at that.
Those are two of his best reviews, and I will hold them up as an example of that Doug Walker can, if he tries, create critical analysis that's actually meaningful. I think his critical analysis of, say, Stephen King's body of work is ridiculous because he just kind of boils it down to tropes and ideas and makes, oh, hey, isn't it funny how Stephen King sets his books in Maine? Like, yeah. Everyone knows that. That's not particularly insightful information, Doug. Oh, Stephen King's endings are bad. Yeah, Stephen King himself says that.
You, want me to sign it for you?
Nah, I didn't like the ending.
So it's like, this is kind of going, okay, that observation on itself isn't particularly good. Why is it significant that his endings are bad? Why does he write his endings like that? Well, Stephen King has mentioned multiple times that he writes his books kind of spur of consciousness, that he writes them through a stream of consciousness style. He writes the pages, edits the pages as they are written, and he does edit, he does refine, but his endings are usually the last thing he works on, and usually he's refined so much leading up to that point that he's kind of, sometimes he has a good idea. Like with Cujo, for example, he has no memory of even writing Cujo because he's on drugs the whole time. If you want me to do a Stephen King video, like a full Stephen King video, I will, but I'll get that later. Anyway, the point is, Doug Walker's critical observations are usually very surface level. And look, some of the movies that Doug Walker reviews, they are bad. Like, why would anyone... Like Food Fight, for example. That movie's just inherently terrible. There's nothing about that film that's artistically valuable. It's just a mess of a movie. And you can easily go and point, why is this happening? And that's where Doug Walker's critical analysis of riffing works best. He can just point to something and go, hey, that's happening right now, and that's terrible. How did anyone sign off on this? That is where he exceeds at, because his incredulous, loud response to everything is a good reaction to the bizarre. Again, the bat credit card. But when it comes to more fine details or works he's less familiar with, he struggles. I want to look at two reviews in particular, one very early in his career, one later, but relatively early as well. Early on, Doug Walker was kind of pressured into reviewing Pokemon the first movie. Even as a kid, I thought that review was terrible, because Doug Walker doesn't understand Pokemon.
First of all, I should point out I did not grow up with Pokemon as a kid. And for those of you who don't know what it's about, I can't help you, because nobody knew what the hell it was about. I guess there's these three kids who collect monsters that kind of look like Beanie Babies, except they kill one another and they're being chased by these two gay people or some shit like that. Nobody could follow it.
So the Pokemon movie, in case you don't know, much like Doug's later reviews, the movie does not function on its own. You need to know context. But unlike Doug's reviews, which is just context for 50 jokes to get any of the humor, the Pokemon the first movie, it's more like watching an episode of a show late in the season, You kind of go, okay, all these characters are established, we got all this information, I'm missing details I need to know. So you go in watching it and you're like, oh, I don't know who this character is, I don't know who Misty is, I don't know who Brock is, who's Pikachu, I don't care about that. So the problem there becomes context, right? It becomes knowing what's happening. And Doug didn't know anything. Now, rather than say watch the show for context, he watched the movie on its own and responded to it on its own. Okay, that's fair. You got a lot of backlash, though, from Pokemon fans who are like, unfair to the movie, you're not really talking about this all that well. Doug Walker, early on, did not do his due diligence with research. The Mako thing is a great example of that, where he made fun of Mako's voice in the TMNT CGI movie. Mako, the actor, had just recently passed away from cancer, I believe, at that time. And so making fun of his voice and making emphysema jokes don't age all that well. So, and he made light of it. He corrected it. He did course correct. He acknowledged his error there and did try to poke fun at himself more than anything else. But again, that demonstrates a problem. Doug Walker could have found this out if he just Google searched the actors beforehand, which many other people had. But it also shows a blind spot. If Doug Walker doesn't know about it, he's not going to go out of his way to find out about it. He's not going to do research. He's not going to do due diligence. So with that context, you think, oh, he made the error twice. Gets better, right? Cut to his return after To Boldly Flee, we get to his Sailor Moon video, which I think is just awful.
14-year-old girl acts stupid, uses magical powers to look slutty and stupid, talking cat tells her how to fight crime because she's so stupid, surrounds herself with smarter girls that make her look even more stupid.
That's Sailor Moon.
What?
The formula you're describing is Sailor Moon.
Do they have a villain that keeps attacking the same town?
Yes.
Do they have a tedious romance with a magic boyfriend?
Yes.
Do they repeat the same animation?
Worse than Hanna-Barbera!
And it was successful?
It's one of the most popular animes of all time!
Eureka? Oh dear, well this is embarrassing.
Aside from the fact that he misrepresents the whole show as a collective whole, he only watched about 10 episodes of the show. Now, it's a 200-episode series. It's a long-running series. I get you can't watch it all. However, even in those couple of episodes, he gets details wrong.
Here's a confusing scene. We see her walk by a poster of a young girl dressed exactly how she is dressed. Like it's from a movie or a show or something.
I wish I could be like Sailor V. She's so beautiful and smart. Something exciting's always happening in her life, not like mine.
So, what? A movie or TV industry got wind of this idea that coincidentally is exactly the same as what's going on right now? Does that mean that something like Transformers is a true story then? Because to be fair, my car has been giving me dirty looks.
Sailor V is a character, basically Sailor Venus, who is a Sailor Scout before Sailor Moon shows up. It's someone Sailor Moon looks up to. Doug Walker misinterprets this entirely and acts like it's some weird meta thing. Like it's like, wait, like he doesn't understand, it doesn't compute to him that, oh, there's just other Sailor Scouts, Sailor Senshi, Sailor Soldiers out there. And in case you're wondering, yes, he does show footage of Sailor Venus later in the review and has no idea they're the same person. He then judges the whole show based on the formula of the first 10 episodes. That basic research would tell you that's not how the show goes. But he does do some research because he references Sailor Uranus and Sailor Neptune, both of which show much later on in the show.
Actually, things got kind of interesting with her character, seeing how Uranus and Neptune were cousins in the show, but not in the Japanese version. No, in the Japanese version, they were a couple. Yeah, kind of funny how we can sex up our 14-year-olds all we want, but the idea of them being attracted to something that don't have a penis apparently was too much for Americans back then. So just to check. Okay, shame. Okay, shame.
This is a point that I kind of actually like, so I'll give Doug that. What I find very frustrating is the way he structures the formula. He decides what the whole show's formula is based on the first 10 episodes.
I know there's more characters and more villains, but I specifically wanted to address the repeated formula that got Sailor Moon popular in the US, and why on earth it actually worked. And that formula, as I can figure out, is as such. Serena acts like a selfish idiot. Supportive friends pick up her slack. Beryl rubs Crystal Ball like a boob and sends Jedi out to create monster and or device to obtain energy, using a marketing tool targeted towards vain suburbans. One of the scouts discovers the plan or falls for it herself. Transformation takes place via reused sexually confusing animation. Scout or scouts are trapped. Pratt in the Hat seems to get them out and do nothing else. Serena never figures out who he is, uses her magic tiara that she should have used earlier instead of reusing more dialogue footage, destroys villain, and goes back to being an idiot again. So, yeah, just to double check again, why did this work?
Which is funny because the formula fundamentally shifts after episode 12, after they drop a freaking plane on Jadeite, and as the other Sailor Senshi are introduced into the plotline. So episode 8 introduces Sailor Mercury, episode 10 introduces Sailor Mars. The show changes fundamentally when Usagi is no longer the only protagonist. Again, this is where basic research comes in, because he frames his entire show based on how Usagi is in the first few episodes.
Most of the fight scenes require her being trapped or stuck in something for probably longer than is needed.
And Usagi changes a lot. Like, yeah, sure, I'll grant you. The first couple of episodes, Sailor Moon does cry a lot. She is vulnerable. She isn't able to defend herself. But even 100 episodes later, she's diving into the bowels of an eldritch abomination greater than a solar system, winning, and coming back after breaking the cycle of life and death itself. This face has seen some shit, alright? And even before that, you have the fight with Queen Beryl at the end of this season, which again, Doug implies is basically the whole series, but she ends up beating Beryl with power enough to blow up a planet by the end of the first season. I'm also biased because the first few episodes of Sailor Moon, barring the first episode and up until episode 8, are some of the show's weakest episodes. I think the worst is the weight loss one, because it always bothers me when body shaming is incorporated in kids' shows. Personally, I just find it very distasteful, and that bothers me just on an ethical level, but I digress. And to further clarify, every single bad guy under Beryl has a different tactic. While Jadeite tried to exploit popular opinion and all that stuff, Nephirite went towards specific individual people and tried targeting their dreams to exploit them. Zoisite just tackled people who he thought were monsters and turned them into monsters. It changes even in the first season. And from there, it becomes less about scams exploiting people and more about seeing pure dreams corrupted, seeing the conflict of the episode involving the characters feed into the big bad plot.
How's this for inspiration? You're a creep, Darian! You don't know a thing about being cool!
Wow, they really seem like polar opposites and hate each other to the core. They hook up? Nah, and how tediously long do they drag that out? Oh Jesus, just mail me the comedic banter to my office shredder!
That changes 30 episodes in roughly. Point is, his review lacked insight. And I know he also said in the previous video, which I will also show a clip of right now, that he thought Sailor Moon was hot.
Nevertheless, you can't argue with good Japanese animation and their ability to put women in skirts that are so short that give new meaning to the term moon power.
I'm willing to give him a pass because he wasn't aware, and he admitted he wasn't aware and made light of the joke as well.
Why did I still put her in the top 11 hottest anime women list? I didn't know! I swear I didn't know! I mean, look at the way they're drawn, man! I thought they were in college or at the very least late high school. Wouldn't you have made that guess? Come on, look at the way they're showing them off! I swear, audience, I had no idea their real age. I mean, you might be saying to yourself, oh, what, didn't you grow up watching the show? Didn't you pay attention to it at all? No, I didn't!
But that kind of demonstrates the lack of research, doesn't it? If you did a little homework on the show, Doug, you'd know it's about a 14-year-old girl. I'm just pointing it out there. It's a big oversight to miss. How do you not know that? Well, you don't know that because you didn't do any homework on it, and that's the key issue. He has a lack of interest in knowing more about the media. And that demonstrates that he hasn't really changed all that much because his lack of insight continues today. He gets a certain interpretation of a movie, of an idea, of a story, and nothing. And once he gets that in his head, that's it. He kind of like, okay, I know what it is now. It doesn't conform to this idea, to this structure, to this narrative. And he doesn't change it. What's the point of all this, right? Doug Walker is a figure of controversy. Change the channel is a big deal. Why am I talking about these critics only from the perspective of their work as opposed to engaging with the histories around them? Which, granted, other people have done better than I could. But what am I bringing to the table here? Well, there was a video recently that came out, as I'm recording this actually. I was going to record it yesterday, but I chose against it because a new video by Jello Apocalypse just came out. Jello Apocalypse, for those who don't know, he's a critic who's been on YouTube for years. So he has a series of videos where he goes like, oh, this is such and such. And he'll have a little animated short where he sums up the show or movie or whatever and kind of give a quick little summary of what's going on in it. Very popular, very easy to watch, bite-sized little videos, 8 minutes, 9 minutes at most. And he did a video yesterday of One Piece.
OP's is the story of Loosey Goosey. He plays things fast and loose.
And it's a horrendous video. I think it's actually one of his worst videos ever made.
I'm sure all of these guys are absolutely essential. How many of them could you possibly cut while telling the same story? Wow. Oh, that's at least 5 of them.
Because he glosses over this massive story in a couple minutes and just makes statements about, oh, you can cut out half the characters in the show. They're not important. And Oda, what does Oda know about storytelling? He's just a hack.
Listen, the author has great ideas, but he's not always so good at the execution. Just look how long it takes for him to execute this freckle guy.
This review was it lacked insight. It spoke in big, broad strokes, didn't really do the full due diligence of the show. And yeah, One Piece isn't perfect. It has a lot of flaws, but it still is worthy of respect. It's still worthy of honoring. And so with Doug Walker, I saw a lot of the same echoes of Doug Walker's flaws in Jello Apocalypse's video.
Revel in excitement and watch as Lucy has to punch the bad man in order to stop the natural disaster from crashing down and destroying an island that's shaped like a circle. This is every single arc.
Serena acts like a selfish idiot. Supportive friends pick up her slack. Beryl rubs Crystal Ball like a boob and sends Jedi out to create monster and/or device to obtain energy.
He's on fire! He must be from the jungle! Whoa! You didn't tell me our boat was from the jungle! And guess what, baby? He's from the jungle! A bad credit card!
I saw the same issues, I saw the same mistakes, I saw the same problems, and it just proved that we're doing the same thing Doug Walker did. In the modern era, there are so many videos that come out that give the same superficial kind of mimetic humor, where it's a reference to something else, or it's just a recap of a previously established thing. But we act like it's better because we're more polished about it, we're more self-aware about it, right? We're not just echoing what came before. What we're really doing is we're just doing the same thing. It's just the same thing. There's so many recaps of, oh well, this is a TV show. Here's episode 50th of this TV show I just covered, and those are fun to watch. I'll watch them, but most of them just observational reviews. They're just looking at what's presented, going from the Watsonian perspective, and maybe including a gag at the show's expense or at the character's expense, what have you. What goes wrong is that we're not doing anything different. We're still in the same wheel that these other reviewers were in 15, 16 years ago and got better then. Why are we doing this? Why do we keep repeating ourselves? Well, much like Doug's mimetic humor, it's because the repetition of this style is easy to understand and appeals to a wide demographic, and thus there's more audience in it. If you go into the more in-depth, complicated analysis, you will isolate your audience. You will garner a devoted audience, but you will garner a smaller devoted audience. Because really diving into analysis like a good video essay does, that's hard. It's hard to do regularly, and it's hard to really communicate the ideas clearly to an audience. Simple is better, and that's where Doug Walker's success comes in. Even when the jokes were bad, which they often were, he was easy to comprehend, easy to digest, and, to a young audience, an introduction to a bigger world. I think with going through all this whole thing, aside from seeing how great some critics are now versus when they started off, growth and all that's important, I see a lot of myself in these people. There's a personal component to it, aside from the suit I'm wearing. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a sense of, okay, I see myself in these people. I see myself trying to sort out what I think about film, what I think about storytelling, what I think about all this, and going, okay, where am I in relation with this conversation?
I was going to say that I think something interesting that whenever I revisit Doug that is occurring to me again, and like, obviously, like, that's part of the bit and it was part of the time, but like, God, is he so negative? And like, maybe I'm being a little baby saying that, but I think it kind of set the stage for what honestly I have big problem with modern media criticism right now, where it's just like extremely negative and just very desperately and furiously misses the point, almost to the point where it seems intentionally, and like maybe like they were trying to do something novel there, but I think ultimately that's left its fingerprint on like media discourse online in a very not so good way, like a very bad way.
Well, I agree in that people have taken it seriously, because for a lot of these angry reviewer types, it was supposed to be an over-the-top character, like especially with AVGN. It was, oh, look at this nerd getting unreasonably angry at Nintendo games, and with Doug, it was the same thing. His character is supposed to be a bit of an unreasonable asshole, but I think a lot of people didn't realize that it's a bit, and started, like, taking their kind of criticism literally, you know?
Oh, 100%. And the thing also is that with James, he had balanced it out with his positive stuff. With Doug, there was not really that much balance until much, much later.
I would say that also, unlike James, Doug's main issue is that not only did everybody else start taking it seriously, but I think he started taking it seriously too.
100%.
He tried to work in some nuance to the point that the lines blurred and like the critic just became more of a reflection of his actual own genuine negativity.
Hmm.
And
I think absolutely at the beginning it was a bit, but I don't think later on it was still a bit. You know
Well,
what I
you
mean?
see that reflected a lot when he brought back the Nostalgia Critic and how he was talking about it then, where like he started to feel bad about being so negative all the time, and he was like kind of analyzing and criticizing his own work in his own dorky way.
But I don't think he got rid of the negativity, and I think the character itself is birthed from frustration. I think that's whereas like with the AVGN, I think it was birthed from just James messing around with like a recorder and talking about a game that that no one else cared about. He felt. I feel like Doug drew from a lot of existential, like quarter-life crisis kind of stuff, which I think does lead to a more negative outlook, I feel, personally. We are just echoes of what came before, but it's up to us to decide if we choose to repeat full sail what someone did before versus what we can do today. Are we going to be a meme like Doug, where we just repeat ourselves, stuck in a cycle? And Doug has gotten better at times. He has demonstrated growth since the Wall Review. But the problem is, he's also not produced anything as noteworthy as the Wall Review. So no one cares. Sometimes, it's better to be terrible than it is to be good. Because at least terrible, you remember it.
I have a challenge. Can you go back just a few frames to the purple smoky guy?
Yeah.
All right, chat. I have a challenge for you.
Oh God.
Make this guy a Tumblr sexy man immediately.
You heard it here.
That's an order. That's an order.
You can pair him with the Tim Curry smoke from Fern Gully.
Have them be boyfriends.
Yes. Perfect.
They're dating. They're on the same page.
Yeah.
Except he's the slightly healthier one because the other one's actual smog.
Yeah, it's true.
What's a paladin?